Bavaria, Rousseau-Lefebvre, Cima Plus et les fleurons du Québec. Il me fait plaisir d'accueillir notre premier conférencier, M. Cecil Konijnendijk. Il va être à distance. On essaie de sauver l'empreinte carbone qu'on peut. Il va faire sa présentation en anglais, mais ses diapositives seront en français pour permettre à tout le monde de comprendre. Et par la suite, pendant la période de questions, ça me fera plaisir de traduire les questions si vous en ressentez le besoin. Alors, le titre de la conférence est « Renforcer le rôle des arbres urbains en tant que solution basée sur la nature, mettre les connaissances au service de la planification et de la pratique ». Alors, M. Konijnendijk, il est professeur honoraire en foresterie urbaine à l'Université de Colombie-Britannique. Il est co-directeur de la Nature-Based Solution Institute, un laboratoire d'idées pour l'écologisation des villes à travers le monde sur la base de données probantes. Il a plus de 30 ans d'expérience en recherche, en enseignement et comme conseiller en foresterie urbaine et en solutions basées sur la nature. Alors, sans plus tarder, M. Konijnendijk, à vous la parole.
Thank you very much and bonjour. I'm sorry that my speech will be in English, but I'm even more sorry that I won't be with you in person in beautiful Quebec. Hopefully next time. As the chair already mentioned, I have had the pleasure to work with urban forestry, nature-based solutions across the world for about 30 years now, including in Canada. But right now I'm based in the city of Utrecht in the Netherlands, which is one of the cities here that's doing a lot of work in greening, vertical forests on buildings, new neighborhoods with a lot of new green spaces. So a lot of excitement around here. Let me just share my presentation. So as the moderator already mentioned, we'll have a chance to see the slides in French, but I will speak in English, and I'll try not to speak also too fast, as I sometimes do. So yeah, the focus will be very much on urban forest, urban trees, foresterie urbaine, I guess in French, and how that has really become recognized as an important tool to make cities climate adapted, for promoting public health, for in generally creating better and healthier and more resilient cities. And in Europe, the term nature-based solutions is often used in that sense. In North America, that term is sometimes used. Sometimes we also talk about natural climate solutions. And I really like also the concept of phytotechnologie. And I would like to thank again the Société Québécoise de Phytotechnologie for inviting me to give the talk today. So my talk will, first of all, say a little bit more about the increasing recognition of the importance of green space, of trees in cities. And I show you the picture here of Berlin, which is a city that takes its trees and green spaces very, very seriously. And there are even some of the densest parts of the city are actually also very green and have some large trees. Then we talk a bit about the benefits of trees and green spaces, but also some of the, let's say the fears that people may have. Right? And I'm sure in your work as well, sometimes you encounter that people say, well, we don't want trees, or we don't want nature because it's maybe messy, or it leaves leaves or things on our car, etc. And then we'll zoom in on some approaches in terms of governance and policy, but also planning, design and management. And I'll end up with a few perspectives. And one of the tools that I will introduce later in my talk will be the 3-30-300 rule for greener and healthier cities. And I'll talk a bit about how that can be used as a planning concept for trees and nature-based solutions in cities. Yeah, I don't have to tell you, right? I understood that the society has been around since 2007, 2008, if my French was good enough. So it means that you've been working, of course, with these topics for many years as well. But you probably will recognize that during the last few years, there has been an increasing focus on the importance of urban nature, urban green. I would say in my 30-year careers, the last year has really been the moment when I've seen a rapid increase from the political system, from other industries, from other sectors. People start to realize that we need to have green cities in order for us as humans to basically survive, to have cooler cities, more resilient cities, more livable cities. And this is also important, of course, for the younger generation, as many of our children are growing up in urban environments these days. And of course, they should also encounter and engage with nature when they can. So people and trees have a very close relationship. So of course, over time, we have come from the trees as humans. We have sometimes turned ourselves away from them, but then we've also rediscovered them and brought them with us into our cities. And trees are fascinating to us. Of course, they bring us ecosystem services, but I think maybe even more importantly, they are very close to humans. They mean a lot to us. We plant trees when we have a new child, for example, or we plant trees to commemorate people we lost. Trees really symbolize the relation between heaven and earth. And they're really strong representatives, I think, of nature, also in places where nature may not be so present as in our cities. I think we've come to realize, again, the importance of nature during the recent COVID pandemic. And of course, in many cities, also in Quebec, there were pretty strict lockdowns and restrictions. So people were often not even allowed to go to parks or green spaces. And we know already from research that this has had quite some impact on people's mental health and well-being. While in other places, like in Vancouver, where I was living during the first part of the pandemic, we were allowed to go out to the park still. We had to, of course, respect physical distancing. But I think also this was really important, that we could still be outside and still enjoy nature and still also see other people, even though we were not allowed to be close to them. So I think this really made people realize how important nearby nature is. Even seeing a tree from your window, from your home, could make a big difference during the pandemic lockdowns. And some studies already show that people who had visual access to trees and green were mentally healthier, used less medication, had less depression than people who had no view of green during the pandemic. I already mentioned the idea of nature-based solutions. So really the idea is here that we use nature in our cities, but also outside of our city to deal with all kinds of challenges, climate change, water issues. It could also be things like carbon storage, of course, public health promotion. And there's some different conceptualizations of nature-based solutions. Some people say it should be anything that is inspired by nature, while, for example, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature says, no, we really have to not only use nature, but actually also give something back to nature. So a true nature-based solution also does something for nature, not only for people. It's not only nature solving our problems, as it were. I tend to like that approach as well, right? That we try to mobilize nature in our cities to deal with some challenges, but also really try to create more space for nature at the same time. Because we also know that nature can create spontaneous processes, can surprise us, can provide all kinds of benefits that we don't always realize exist. And as already mentioned in my introduction, right? So in the US especially, they talk about natural climate solutions as kind of a synonym for nature-based solutions. But of course, here the focus then is very much on climate action. Well, across the world, and I said I've had the pleasure to work in many different countries and still do, there's a lot of focus on re-greening, rewilding even sometimes, right? Trying to bring wilder nature into our cities. And I think the work of Canadian researcher Suzanne Simard, Professor Suzanne Simard, who is a colleague of mine at the University of British Columbia, has also really been very important there, because she has, of course, shown that trees communicate with each other, exchange nutrients, exchange signals in times of pressure. And this actually makes us look a little bit different at also urban trees, because urban trees are typically put in little boxes. They're often seen as isolated beings, but maybe we have to start thinking much more in tree systems, forest-like systems in our cities as well. And as you probably know, Dr. Simard was recently included in the Times top 100 people, most influential people list, which is of course pretty exciting to see a forest ecology colleague being included in that. But there's also concepts like biophilic cities, right? Embracing, loving nature in our cities, all kinds of approaches, green infrastructure planning, that are really showing that green spaces are lifted on the political agenda. Together with some colleagues, we try to move beyond the idea of nature-based solutions and say, well, we need more than just nature solving our problems. We need to introduce the idea of nature-based thinking. And the idea is really here that we take nature in everything we do in cities, planning, design, building, redevelopment of neighborhoods. In every case, we have to think with nature in mind. We have to think about cyclical processes, about ecology. We have to give space to nature, also wilder nature. And in this way, we can create really more sustainable, more biophilic cities. But of course, this will require a mindset change, a paradigm shift. And I think this is not only needed for us, green people, right? People who are dealing with plants and vegetation in cities, but this mindset change will especially be needed with the engineers, the architects, the planners, but also the medical professionals, etc. So this is really a key assignment I see for myself in the last part of my career, to try to help make that shift and let us think about nature in this more inclusive approach in our cities. So my own career has really been working in this field of foresterie urbaine, or urban forestry as it's called in English. It's hard to translate it often, but the idea is that we look at the city, we look at the municipality as a forest in which trees, woodlands, other plants, but also people interact, people and animals. And if we do that, we look at the city as a forest, then we can take a much more systematic and strategic approach in developing that city and creating a greener city for the benefits not only of people, but actually also for the benefits of other beings in that city. And urban forestry is now about, it was launched in Canada, in Toronto, in the 1960s, so it has been around for a while. But I think it's only now that we start to see it's really being taken seriously also by other disciplines and other professions. So we see that, of course, in some of the work. We already heard the work of SIAC in Quebec. I've also been involved with the International Society of Arboriculture, and I'm actually editing their journal, Arboriculture and Urban Forestry. And there has been a lot of activity during the last decades. So we have books now, we have journals, we even have a World Forum on Urban Forest that has been held now twice. The last time was in Washington, D.C. At the end of last year. And there's all kinds of educational programs as well that put the focus on urban trees and urban forests. So I think, this field is really becoming more mature. Many people now call themselves urban foresters, or at least urban arborists, and are really trying to use trees, use forest and vegetation to make for better cities. So why are we doing that? Well, of course, obviously, and I think you will talk about that later today as well, we know that trees and other vegetation are really essential for our neighborhoods, for our cities, because they provide so many important benefits. This is also recognized even by the United Nations, all the way up at the global level, where things like sustainable urban communities are put into the Sustainable Development Goals, but also the links between trees and forest and water, public health, labor, you name it. All these connections are being made, and the UN is getting more and more active also, not only in rural forests or more natural forests, but also in urban areas. And of course, here we have this continuum from the very center of the urban areas, right, like the city center, to the peri-urban environment, which is still very much influenced by cities. But then also, even if you go further away to the more remote areas, even in a province like Quebec, of course, urban demands, urban values still have a very important role to play. They will decide, for example, on things like conservation or timber production, etc. So the urban is really today, to a large extent, dominating what we do with our trees and forests, not only in cities, but also outside. So I've been working quite a bit with several United Nations organizations, including the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, but also the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, which in spite of its name actually also includes Canada and the US. And one of the things we did is we developed this kind of guideline for sustainable urban and peri-urban forestry for municipalities across the world to develop policies, to develop plans and strategies for promoting urban forestry. And of course, this is based on the wheel of benefits that are climate related, socially related, economically related, but also have to do with things like biodiversity promotion. And I'm pretty sure you're well aware of the many benefits of trees and other plants in cities. But just to highlight some research that I think has been very influential. One study comes from Canada, actually from Montreal. This is the work by Professor Carly Zeter and her colleagues. And what they found is that if you reach a 40% canopy cover per neighborhood, that is really when you start seeing the cooling effects of trees. So having 20% or 15% canopy cover, tree canopy cover, is not sufficient in the time of climate change. We have to really go up quite far to 30, 40, 50% before we can really start cooling our neighborhoods on increasingly hot summer days. And I think this work has really started to kick in motion greening programs across the world, tree planting campaigns across the world. But of course, as we also know, it's not only about new trees, it's especially also about maintaining the trees we have in our cities, make sure these grow old. And this, of course, requires a lot of careful maintenance, protecting of tree sites, etc. Because really, a tree is hard to replace, right? A big tree with a lot of ecosystem services will take many, many years before it can be replaced by a new tree. Very interesting was also this study that came out last year in the medical journal called The Lancet, one of the top medical journals in the world. This was a study by the Barcelona Institute of Global Health. They looked at 93 cities in Europe and related canopy cover to temperature, to global heat, to local heat, but also to the number of people who die prematurely, so too early, during heat waves. And they've concluded that if you reach 30% tree canopy cover in a city, you can actually reduce the number of premature deaths during heat waves by at least 1/3, maybe as much as 40%. So that means that out of all the people who die during heat waves, die too early, 2 out of 5, right, could have been saved if we would have had a better tree canopy cover. Just to put this in perspective, in Europe, about 10 years, 15 years ago, we had a really big heat wave where, according to estimates, maybe 60, 70,000 people died prematurely. We could have saved, 20, 30,000 people, or at least prolonged their life, right, during or after these heat waves. So this really shows that trees are not just nice, but they are actually essential and they are life-saving. And I think this message is really important to always communicate to politicians. Trees are not nice to have, they are absolutely essential to have. They're critical infrastructure together with other plants in our cities. So yeah, recently we have seen other studies as well. So one study in Europe that shows that about 60% of people in European cities live in areas with insufficient green space. And this results in more than 40,000 people dying. So actually we can really see the relationship between lack of green space, higher pollution levels, higher temperatures, and actually people dying. So it is really a matter of life and death. And of course, also it's an economic industry. This study from the Arbor Day Foundation found that in the United States, about 500,000 people are directly employed by urban forestry and arboriculture, probably there are even more. But actually it also is a sector that generates $64 billion in economic footprint. So this is really a pretty substantial industry as well. It will be interesting to see similar figures from Canada as well. Now, one of the things that I think is probably for me the most exciting today is the studies that show that even seeing trees, even seeing green space around us is really very good for us. So studies that show, seeing trees in front of our house make us happier, make us healthier, enhance our well-being. And more studies are really showing that also during the COVID pandemic, how important it is to have visible green. So not just parks, not just cooling green, but also really green which is pleasant to the eyes, which is around us, which is close to us. But I already mentioned, right, that there are, of course, some things we have to also manage in terms of maybe some of the disvalues or disservices. That could be, for example, wild animals that come into our cities and create a nuisance. I know this is also an issue in many Quebec municipalities. In Vancouver, I remember I was very shocked to see that mountain lions, pumas were coming into town sometimes, or bears. So of course these are creating some issues. But it could be more like things like diseases, like tick-borne diseases that are worrying people. It could also be things like mosquitoes, right, that bring in general many diseases with them, but also falling branches of trees, etc. So we have to make sure, of course, that as we optimize the positive aspects of urban forest and urban green space, that we minimize the negative ones as well. And we are aware of some of these potential problems. All right, let's look then at some of the approaches worldwide to promote trees and forest and other vegetation as nature-based solutions. The picture you see there is from Fuzhou in China, where they created a kind of a canopy walkway of more than 13 or 14 kilometers, so that people can actually walk on or over the urban forest of Fuzhou and get a really unique perspective of their city. So quite an interesting way of experiencing a local urban forest. Well, I know that in Canada, there's some new initiatives too to promote tree planting, tree management in cities. But of course, when we look to the south, to your neighbor to the south, we have seen an unprecedented investment in urban forests during recent years under the so-called Inflation Reduction Act by President Biden. More than $1.5 billion extra has been put into urban forestry. And the idea is really here to focus on communities, vulnerable communities, where people have ill health, low income, maybe people of BIPOC communities, right? People of color, etc. And also these are typical areas where tree cover is low. So people already have ill health. They're even more hit by heat waves. So here we really need more trees and more urban forests. In Europe, we have several initiatives by the European Union. For example, the new nature restoration law that is for the first time calling for a minimum canopy target for each municipality in the European Union. So every municipality should reach at least 10% tree canopy cover if this law gets adopted. 10% is not so much, but it's at least a start. And it's interesting to see that canopy targets start becoming part of a policy. Of course, also really interesting new ideas of like looking at the city as a national park, trying to really break the boundary between nature and cities and say, well, hey, a city can be a national park too, as they did in Stockholm and also in London. London calls itself, London in the UK, I mean, also calls itself a natural park city. And of course, we have national parks also in Canadian cities, for example, the Rouge National Park in Toronto. And this really, again, breaks the boundaries and makes us look at cities slightly differently and try to really think about the role of nature in our daily life. But there's also quite a few mega projects now that are greening cities on a tremendously large scale. Many of you are familiar, of course, with Singapore and the Gardens by the Bay and other projects. And basically any development project, any building project in Singapore has to be green. Excuse me. So there's always focus on greening buildings as well. I've also done a little bit of work in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, where the current canopy cover is below 1%. But they want to bring that up to about 9 or 10%. They want to create 440 new parks, and they really want to, in general, green the city. So this is, quite a project, of course. Now, money is, of course, not a problem in Saudi Arabia. Problems are related to things like water, making better use of recycled water, for example, to green the city. But yeah, the government does realize that if they don't do this, during large stretches of summer, the city will be unlivable as we hit 50, 55 centigrades on hot summer days, and people just have to stick to air conditioning all the time. So this is really becoming a very urgent pressure on many cities in the Middle East, but also elsewhere in the world. Now, some of the criticism we greening people sometimes get is, well, there's no space for new green space. We cannot put more trees in. The city is full. There's too much pressure. But of course, even old cities like Barcelona show that this is actually possible. If you look at the superblock structure in Barcelona in the 19th century part of the city called Eixample, you see there that they have taken 3x3 city blocks, and within that new grid, they've actually taken away a lot of the car habitats, the traffic, and they've started planting trees and creating more public spaces. For example, on the 23 intersections. And this is really creating a completely different city. This was my street where I lived until a few years ago. And you see that the street was dug up, new trees were planted, and cars are really pushed back, and bikes and pedestrians were giving the preference. But it is not always so easy in terms of policy. This is a study led by Cindy Chang at the University of British Columbia, where we looked at the largest Canadian cities, and we looked at their urban forest strategies as well as their climate strategies. And it turned out that, in many cases, there is very little coordination between urban forestry, trees, and climate action, which it's kind of surprising, right? Because you would expect that these two types of policies and strategies are closely related. So we can still win a lot, I think, by cutting across the boundaries and the disciplines, even within the city organization, where there's still too many people working in silos. And we can really do better in making more integrative policies and strategies for greening our cities. Now, sometimes it's easier when you're in China, for example. Of course, you can do top-down government. and not something that we in our countries are preferring, but it can really lead to incredible greening campaigns, like in Beijing, the capital of China, where they established more than 50 million new trees in Beijing, and they actually want to do 100 million. But of course, this raises all kinds of questions about, okay, where's the land coming from? Farming is being stopped, and then trees are being planted, and farmers become foresters overnight. So work by a former PhD student of mine, now Yao, at Beijing Forestry University, looks at all the tensions and all the players involved in this even top-down greening initiative. But the scale of this kind of work, of course, is mind-boggling. So policies and governance, that was one thing, but then of course we need to put this more into practice. We have to think about planning, we have to think about planning guidelines, we also have to think about design and management. You see the picture here, this is the World Cup Park in Seoul in Korea. This used to be a garbage dump basically, but when the World Cup football came to, or soccer I should say, came to Seoul, they actually created this new forest park in the middle of the city, which gives the city of course a completely new outlook. And these kind of projects we see more and more, that actually changing cities in how they look, how green they start looking. Often when I work with decision makers, and I work a lot with different governments at national level, local level, but also actually at the Nordic and the European level, and the question often is, Cecil, well, if you give us some kind of recommendations, simple recommendations, how we should plan for green spaces and trees in our cities, what would those be? So in this document for the Nordic Council of Ministers, which is the collaboration between the Nordic countries, I basically boiled it down to 4 key principles. The first is proximity, proximité. So we really want to have green and trees close to everybody, because then these people also get the benefits. If you have to walk too far to a park, you don't have the cooling effect of trees, then you don't get the benefits. And this also, of course, relates very much to the visibility of vegetation. Then the second, and very well established, is connectivity, right? To make sure that we actually connect our green space, build a structure, build safe roads between different green areas. And we also need diversity. We need a diversity not only of tree species or plant species, but we have to also create a diversity of experiences, different types of green, from social green, sports green, more natural green, wilder green, etc. Also recognizing, of course, that people are very diverse, and many people will come with different wishes and different preferences for what trees they like, what green space they like. And then finally, very importantly, also in Canada, this whole idea of equity, tree equity. So making sure that actually that trees are provided to everybody, green space is provided to everybody as a basic infrastructure, as a basic public service. So green, nature, access to nature as a human right, you can say. And this, of course, is also driving the whole discussion about tree equity in countries like the United States. Some work we did with the Flemish government in Belgium was looking at all the research that's there on the health promoting roles of different types of green space, and trying to come with some design and planning guidelines. Unfortunately, this is only in Dutch, but one of the interesting conclusions is that actually you can do a few things to promote health benefits of green pretty rapidly. So there's some really, not quick fixes, but really some low-hanging fruits. The first one is to increase canopy cover. So if you can even add 1 or 2% to local tree canopy cover, you'll see a lot of benefits and a lot of gains in terms of public health. Then you want to have pocket parks, or small parks, right? Small urban parks in every neighborhood. Places where people can meet, where they can restore themselves, where maybe children can play. So these should be brought in, and they don't have to be so large, these parks. And we also need community gardens. So we need places where people can meet to grow food together. And these are also found to actually promote a lot of different health benefits, including social health. So the fact of getting people out of social isolation. And then finally, and I think not surprising for you, we have to really do better in making our schools, our universities greener. A lot of schools are removing green and trees because they want to remove risks. But actually, we know from research that if we green school neighborhoods, school environments, then actually children will learn better, they develop better, they'll be more social. So we really have to put more focus on the greening of our school environments. So when you do planning and develop strategies for green space, of course, you have to also find ways of measuring impact. And for metrics of the benefits of green, you can say there's like the exposure, right? So how am I, not by active use, but how am I exposed to green around me? How much green can I see? How many trees do I have in my street? How easy is it to have a green walk? So that's the first. And then the second is really, how easy is it for me to access green spaces? For example, how easy is it for me to get to a local park or a local forest? And the metrics that should actually combine, you can say exposure metrics, how much green is there in my neighborhood, to with access neighborhoods, how easy is it to get to a park that's open in public space. And ideally, you want to combine that in kind of hybrid metrics. So that's exactly the idea of that I used when I created in February 2021 the 330-300 rule or guideline. And what the rule says is actually, well, we have to see trees and green, we have to live in a neighborhood with pretty high canopy cover, and we should be able to walk to a nearby public space, a park or another green space within 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes walk. So let's say a 300-meter distance, which is also a recommendation by the World Health Organization. So it boils down then to seeing at least 3 larger trees, mature trees from every home, every workplace, every school, but also every place of care. At the neighborhood level, we should have at least 30% tree canopy cover. And then the 300 meters is the walking distance I have, maximum walking distance to the nearest public green space of a high quality. And you see the pictures there in the background from Barcelona, from where I was living, how they can look. And there's actually quite some research to back up this rule of thumb or this guideline. Quite some studies that actually show that if you reach 30% canopy cover, you see a lot of the health benefits increasing pretty dramatically. So you see things like people sleeping better, you see things like children being born with higher birth weight, people have lower mental health issues. And similarly for the 300 meters, there's quite some research that shows that if people have green parks nearby, they will use those green spaces more frequently, and they will also be in better physical and mental health. Well, this is really taken off pretty rapidly, and a bit surprisingly, it went kind of viral, you can say, and within 3 years, cities across the world are now using the 330-300. This is maybe nice to see. In France, recently it has become a thing. So the Nantes Metropole region created a new tree charter, 14 municipalities in that region. And one of the principles they're using is the 330-300 rule. And the mayor of Nantes has actually signed the charter. So it shows there is really a political ambition to make this work. So yeah, cities across the world, from Birmingham to Granada in Spain, to many cities in the Netherlands. About half of the cities now in the Netherlands is using it. But also Nature Canada, for example, are using 330-300 as a tool to really bring trees, bring green spaces to everybody, make it measurable, right? It's easy to actually measure and assess and monitor, but also to have some really clear guideline for how to talk about green space. Because 330-300 is not so technical. It's easy to understand for people from different backgrounds, different disciplines. It's easy to understand for citizens and neighborhood groups. It's easy to understand for politicians. So I think that is probably one of the strengths of the rule, is that it's actually easy to comprehend, while it also has a good evidence base. Yeah, and I sometimes joke that 30 years of my career, I've been publishing a lot of articles and books and so, but maybe my highlight came when I was featured in the French Cosmopolitan as the person who can, through 330-300, make you happy in 24 hours. So I thought that was really nice to see. When we get with trees and with plants into lifestyle magazines, I think we're on the right track. I already mentioned Nature Canada, so they have produced this report. I believe it's also in French on the 330-300 rule as a really good way of bringing tree canopy to everybody in Canadian cities. So worth checking out if you have access to the report. And then recently, actually, the weakest part of the rule, which is the 3 trees, right? There was no real research saying that, well, it has to be 3 trees. But I felt that 3 trees make sense, because then at least you have some trees around you, around the house, around the school. But a recent study by a group at Clemson University in the US found that if people actually can see 3 trees or more from their home, they actually have a higher reported mental well-being. So there's actually some evidence starting to show that actually that 3 part of the rule may also be actually defendable from a science, from a research perspective, which is great. So actually, the science, the evidence behind it actually does help us. to move this forward. Now, of course, I know also in Canada, some municipalities are doing better than 330-300. So this is the minimum, right? This is really ambitious in many parts of the world, maybe also in parts of Quebec. But in other parts, of course, you want to be more ambitious and you don't want to lower yourself to lower scores, right? So this is a minimum. If you can be higher, wonderful, right? If you say, well, I want to have 5, 40, 200, that's absolutely fine, of course. That's even better. So really what I want to stress too, and I'm approaching the final part of my talk here, is that we really have to focus on large trees, keeping the trees we have, making sure trees grow big, because those trees provide most benefits. So work by the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium, of Louvain, they actually found that in a study in Brussels, a neighborhood where you had some larger trees, people actually had better mental health than an area where you had a lot of very small trees. So there is really a link between us seeing large trees, big trees, and our mental health and well-being. And of course, also in terms of the cooling benefits of trees with large canopies. And I had a chance on Belgian TV to connect that also then to the 330-300, saying, well, large trees, a few large trees can actually do a lot for the tree and the 30 in your neighborhood already. So there's quite a lot of business development around 330-300 as well. So several companies are able to map it now. This is an example from my home city, Utrecht. So I'm actually right now presenting there, where you see the arrow, that's where I'm sitting, my office is. And this is for the visible trees. So this map shows you for the city, seeing 3 trees or less or more. So you see in Utrecht, most people, this is the center of the city right here, but most people in Utrecht can actually see at least 3 trees from their window. 3 larger trees of a canopy of, I think, 27 or 28 square meters. But if you would see maps of 30% canopy cover, this map will be much more red, right? So seeing trees, also 300 meters is often easier to achieve than 30% canopy, especially in older cities, in older medieval cities, etc. But even in Latin America, cities are working with this. This is the city of Guayaquil in Ecuador. And here they looked at neighborhood level. How are individual neighborhoods doing for the 3, the 30, and 300? And where should we start prioritizing in terms of bringing trees and nature-based solutions into local communities? So if you're intrigued, if you want to read more, there's a new website called treesrule or treesrule.com, where there's a lot of information in different languages, including French, a lot of articles, scientific reports, etc. So this will be a good starting point for you to learn more. And then, of course, how to implement this, right? What kind of ideas can we use then to bring 330, 300 to our cities across the world? So I break it down in 3 concepts. The 300 meters concept is something that we could do with bosquets urbains, or maybe urban groves in English. So small woodlands that have meaning, that are there for food growing, for community, maybe for spirituality. Really building off the old idea of groves, of wooded places of meaning. Then for the 30, we can start thinking about street woods or linear forests, right? So every street could be seen as a forest, like they do in places like Berlin, or they do in places like Singapore. So private trees, public trees together, they would form a pretty unique street ecosystem where people can hold block parties and meet their neighbors. And then finally, and maybe even the most importantly, doorstep trees, or as in French, arbres devant la porte. I like that concept too. So everybody should have a few trees close to where they live, in their garden, in their street, where they have a very special relationship with. And you follow those trees, you maybe greet them in the morning. And these are basically your trees. These are your local trees that you feel very strongly about. So I think through these concepts, and of course other concepts like tiny forests or pocket parks, community gardens, we can really materialize and bring these ideas of greening our cities home. And sometimes when it's hard to plant trees, you can have a temporary forest. This is the project called Bosk in a Dutch city called Leeuwarden, where a Dutch artist called Bruno Doedens put, I think, 5,000 trees in big containers. Started at the railway station of Leeuwarden, you can see it here, creating an instant forest. And then every week they went, these trees were in big movable crates, they went to another neighborhood. And where there were not many trees before, people saw all of a sudden that, oh wow, my neighborhood, my street is green, can we keep the trees? And of course, this really raises people's interest in greening the city, Check it out online. There's some really wonderful YouTube videos of people filming from their apartments, and all of a sudden the trees are walking by past their window. So a wonderful project, and of course, yeah, maybe not a sustainable project, but really a project that shows what you can do to connect people and trees. And of course, yeah, lots of things happening, right? We see green on buildings. We see projects like the High Line or the Solo 7017 projects. We can do so much also with phytotechnology, right? To actually integrate buildings and trees and vegetation in much more innovative ways. So I think as the technologies develop, as the knowledge develop, we are able to do much more in our cities as well. And this is again in Utrecht, a new vertical forest being created, a new skyscraper, high building, where actually trees are everywhere on the balconies and on the building. And of course, also highways in our cities are often disappearing or are being put away. This is Utrecht again, where you see here the bottom picture. There was a big highway going straight to the city that has been reverted back to a canal again, to water with a linear park around it. And this is a hot summer day here today in Utrecht. People are swimming in the water. They're using the shores as a beach. It's really, it has changed the whole idea, the whole vibe of the city, which is really wonderful to see. Yeah, and then finally getting to the last couple of slides. So of course, it's very easy to talk about growing trees, growing plants in our cities. We have good technologies, but we also really have to think about the soil, right? What can we do with the underground infrastructure that's there, all the cables? How can we create better soil volume for our trees? And I'm involved in a project with a French architect based in the Netherlands called Jean-François Gauthier. And Jean-François is really trying to do that at a very small level, improving the soil, monitoring the soil, working also with local children, etc., to see what can we do to create miniature forests that actually also have a healthy soil environment. So yeah, an important part of this whole discussion to look underground, of course, as well. So yeah, at this end of this journey of trees and urban forests and nature-based solutions that took you all over the world, I think that this is really a good time for our field. There's a lot of focus, there's a lot of opportunities, but we just have to make sure we do the right thing, and we actually make sure we're part of these developments, and that actually our expertise is being used. Of course, it's still challenging. There's a lot of demands on cities, climate change, trees are under pressure, but there's also a sense of urgency. And I recognize it not only in the green fields today, but actually among politicians of different political parties. People start seeing we need to do this. We need to use trees and green in our cities. And of course, also we have better studies, we have better research, and based on that, we can also develop guidance like the 330-300 rule. So I'm hopeful, I'm an optimist when it comes to it, and I'm sure that with all the expertise that you have as well in the room there, you can provide a lot of solutions, a lot of ideas. Let's just make sure we do that on the longer term, and we try to really start to think about how we want our cities to look like 30, 40, 50, 100 years into the future, because now is the time to develop greener, healthier, more resilient cities. I thank you very much for listening. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Mr. Konijnendijk. This was very inspiring. I wrote down, trees are not nice to have. I think that's the take-home message I'm going to take with me. And also in terms of nuisance, you talked about the fauna invading cities when we green it. I just want to let you know that wild turkeys are getting pretty wild here, and coyotes as well. So you're welcome to Montreal anytime you want to encounter one of these. So, est-ce qu'il y a dans la salle des questions pour notre conférencier? Oui. Il y a un micro qui se situe dans le couloir. Oui, désolé, j'ai oublié de le mentionner. D'ailleurs, j'ai oublié mon cellulaire à ma place, donc s'il y a des questions en ligne, bien vouloir venir les reprendre au micro, ça sera plus facile. Si vous souhaitez poser votre question en français, je pourrais la traduire en anglais.
Good morning, Cecil. I'm Christian Matteau, CSW Landscape Architect. Thank you for your presentation. You started your conference with an image from Barcelona. You had lots of images of the Plan Cerda, which is a wonderful planning document. One of the things I noticed visiting last year was that some of these spaces were a bit messy because of the heat wave and the lack of water, unprecedented lack of water right now. So what are the solutions for accompanying these measures? And I'm wondering about maybe communication towards the public so that these spaces, which may be messy, they need time to develop, and we need to educate the population. Do you have any experience with that? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful question, and you're absolutely right that when we do these kind of projects, the plans and the intentions are great, but things don't always look wonderful from the start. And of course, the idea of drought is an issue. So as you say, I think communication and making people aware that there is a certain messiness involved, that things will look different over time. And then, of course, also making sure we choose the right tree species that are drought tolerant, etc. But I think you gave the answer, right? I think communication, awareness, and acceptance of a certain messiness and wildness that can come with these kind of projects will be crucial. So yeah, thanks so much for raising that issue.
Thank you.
Merci. On a une autre question au micro.
Bonjour. Hi, my name is Sophie. I work for Sustainability Solutions Group. It's a cooperative that actually started in BC a while ago. Some of our clients are municipalities trying to do action planning, especially in the US. Some of our clients have been asking us about the quantifications of all the green infrastructure benefits. So I was wondering, what are the latest tools for quantification? Those 330, 300 were very interesting. I was wondering if there were more detailed tools you knew about, like GHG sequestration, air quality enhancement, water management, but I'm really interested about like the quantification of it, about it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's another great question. So I think one of the tools that I think is really good for trees especially is iTree, right? That's a US Forest Service tool. So iTree is really good for quantifying things like air pollution reduction, carbon, water regulation, but it's really tree focused. There's some other models like met that do ecosystem service mapping. So there are a few tools out there. You're very welcome to send me an email or a message offline, and I can send you some links to some of those quantification tools and economic quantification tools as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Alors, merci. Je vois personne d'autre qui nous fait signe. So thank you very much, Mr. Konijnendijk. This was a very interesting and inspiring conference to open our annual event. And so hopefully we can follow up with you for the tools and details if the participants have any more questions. Thank you so much for being with us today. And let's get a last round of applause for our speaker.
Thank you. Enjoy your day. Thank you.